Radio.
And let's get to business. Desmond Israel is our guest now. He is a lawyer. He also is a data privacy and information security practitioner. Best person to educate us on our topic today. Desmond, thanks again for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Okay, so look, let's start from the top. Let's try and understand some terms here and what we are discussing. Okay, so when we talk about interference in democracy using technology, what are we talking about? How is it done?
Okay, so let's look at it this way. There is an electoral process to establish that democracy. So any external activity that interferes with the outcome, one, or people's opinion, the public opinion about the outcome, is what you can term as election interference or interference within the democratic process.
Right.
Yeah. So for many people, when you say election interference, the first thing that comes to their mind is cyber, right? But then there are two parts of this. There is the information operations, and then there is the cyber operations. Now, under the information operations, we can discuss disinformation, where fake news, propaganda, and all these things come to play. And then under the cyber operations, that is where you discuss unauthorized access to maybe infrastructure that supports the electoral process. So someone gains access to maybe a biometric database, alters the register. Someone is able to intervene within the electronic voting system and maybe do what we call vote tampering, so that the outcome is skewed to a particular interest. Yeah, so those are actually the two structures under which you can put election interference. So it's a bit misleading when somebody says, well, this has nothing to do with us, we do offline voting. Yes, you may do offline voting, but the democratic process includes people's opinion. So if I stage maybe a social media misinformation warfare or disinformation warfare, and I could get one candidate to be disliked, you have actually interfered with the electoral process. Yeah.
Okay. Now, how widespread is this around the world? How often does this happen?
It's so at the scale of which reports have been reading. I think one of the credible reports is from Carnegie. They have what they call the International Peace Endowment Report, and they had a 2018 report which captured about 5 European countries, not only doing suspicion but reporting incidents of electoral interference from other states. You may know the culprit, but I'm sure we'll get there. We'll
no, tell us. I mean, let's get to it.
Right.
Who was the culprit?
So in all 5 countries, Russia is the culprit. So 2016, the United States, and then we had 2017, we had France, we had Germany, we had Dutch, and then we had Sweden. And there were different engagements. In the US, for instance, we had access to what you call electoral personnel, like people who were at the forefront of the elections, people whose image and persona, if they could alter, would definitely change the complexion of the electoral votes. And so they did that. They got access to the Democratic National Committee's office electronically.
Wow.
They were able to pick up information, emails, correspondence on Hillary Clinton, and they smeared it on her, and it worked. It worked. And as I speak to you now, 12 Russian military operatives, intelligence operatives, are under FBI wanted list. And if you go to the FBI website, you can see that. And it's clearly about election interference. So that 2016 activity in the United States is our class case for interference. Then we could go to the Dutch scenario. Theirs was about the parliamentary. In fact, it got to the extent where they moved their e-voting to offline voting. Yes, that's how uneasy they got. And for many people who at least practice cybersecurity, nobody plays with Russia and China when it comes to these cyber activities. You could credit them with a level of understanding of the space. They've been known to be very good at what they do, stealth mode attacks and all that. So yes, but the Dutch intelligence also picked this up in 2016. So they kind of like start to put preparations in order to make sure that everything was in check. It happened to Macron too. in the France election. I don't know if you followed, but at a point, the message was that Macron was gay. That was a fake news warfare. That was a disinformation warfare, you know, and Macron has to set up what he called the fake news commando team, you know, comprised of, you know, technologies, lawyers who were able to kind of like drill down, decipher the information, try to find the source, and also be able to manage the impact that it was going to have on his campaign. So, and the French intelligence has this as part of their reports that indeed they did have election interference from the information warfare point of view. Let's go to the UK. Prior to Brexit, the snap votes, Theresa May, there was 188 cyber attacks against the UK. Yes, it's on the records, so people who are listening can verify these things. And why? Because the Russian interest was not really about the Brexit output. It was just to put, you know, what a professor termed as distrust in democracy. You know, so that's one of the motivation. I don't need to really get anything from you, but if I don't align with democracy, yeah, I could actually use this to show people around the world that democracy is a sham. You know, so that's what happened with the UK. Germany also had some interaction with that. The German record shows that they did not really have an impact. They did two things. They wrote directly and warned Russia to stay out of their elections. They beef up their cyber infrastructure. And I think one thing that we can learn from the German scenario is the political parties came together with the government. The idea was they are more interested in protecting their democracy than allowing a third party to make a sham out of it. So it was not about if another party would be benefiting from that, you know, interference. It was more of a country that believed that if we want to develop, if we want to grow, if we want to keep our democracy intact, then we have to come together, build a united front against a third party who ultimately, you know, will be the one laughing at us, you know. And so that's what they did. And then the Swedish scenario also came in. So, I mean, across the world and with top guys like the countries that I've mentioned, they have records that shows that there's been external interference in their elections, you know, from that cyber operation and information operation point of view. So, where does that leave us? We are not an exception, you know. We are not an exception. We can discuss our very unique case, you know, because I think after 2016 we have like a totally offline voting system. But if you look at the way cybercrime and electronic transactions are structured, you don't need to be wholly electronic. You know, the activity doesn't need to be wholly electronic. Even in our own Electronic Transactions Act, it says that for the purposes of that law, cybercrime would be any activity that you start partly or wholly electronically.
Okay, any activity that you start.
Yes, partly or wholly electronically. So long as it's prescribed as a crime. So let's say I want to defraud you, right? But we had a conversation on my misrepresentation. And then you send mobile money to me, right? And mobile money forms part of the evidence of a cybercrime because that false pretense, that defrauding was partly conventional, as in a conversation that we have, maybe not even on phone, maybe one-on-one, but then the money was actually sent electronically. Exactly. So put that back into the perspective of this conversation. We have an electoral process, right? It includes campaign. It includes communications. It includes social media. It includes emails flying from one political actor to the other. It includes their WhatsApp messages, the WhatsApp groups that some of their communication teams belongs to. All these things form part of the bigger, you know, electoral process. And for the two big giants who kind of like compete on the election, i.e. the NDC and the MPP, they are huge stakeholders in this. Tell you what, if today somebody manages to get access to one of the candidates' accounts, whatever it is, let's say email, WhatsApp, and, you know, for the sake of conversation, he puts up what would term a debt on the person, maybe something immoral or something criminal, you know. What do you think is going to happen if that information comes out? Definitely, if polls shows that you are on top, after that dissemination of that information, you're going to drop because people would begin to have disdain towards you.
Yeah.
That's the problem with when you are looking at the actors and you try to take them away from the equation, because most of the time we're always looking at the Electoral Commission. And then we say that, well, we only have our biometric register, but then we do offline voting, and that's enough. But if we look at the entire gamut of all the activities prior to election, that's why you have pre-electoral interferences, election day interferences, and post-election day interferences.
A couple of things are happening. First of all, almost every credible survey is demonstrating a reduction in our confidence in democracy. It's happening as we speak. Couple that with the fact that one of the two big culprits, Russia, is growing its influence in Africa, but is doing so in countries where democracy has collapsed. So you've got Burkina Faso, you've got Niger, you've got Mali. Following a coup, suddenly Russia turns up and becomes, a partner to whoever has taken over the government. Now, is it logical to assume that Russia would have an interest in destabilizing democracies in Africa?
On the level of assumption, I would say yes. It is possible because it's an assumption. Why? Plausible to the extent that wherever Russian interest is, they've been known, the facts will bear me out that Russian would go to every length to protect that interest. It even includes anti-Russian sentiments. Like a media house that publishes something about Russia, you're likely going to get a army of hackers coming after you.
Wow.
Yes. So they could pull that thing down. Like some presidential personality who makes a statement contrary to Russian interest, they're likely going to do something. So most of the time we don't get these things out there because state machinery against state machinery. And I tell my colleagues that we're already speaking in international cyber warfare, but in Africa we pretty much want to brush it because we have bread and butter issues to deal with. So we're not really concerned about the high level things, but these things are flying all over our faces every single day. Wow. So it takes me back to your question, would they have an interest? Assuming they do, yes, they will. Say for instance they are getting cobalt from a country, or they are getting uranium or any of the minerals that supports their governance and the operations of their state and their economy. And then there's a candidate who is likely in their time going to be an imperialist. They have a socialist agenda. They have a communist agenda. That's why they align well with the Chinese. So if they find that happening, I've told you already, they have the capability to stage some of these things, And again, for the listeners, it's all on the assumption, but we are making this assumption based on what we know about Russia, about interference in elections, and about cybersecurity. Right. So they have the capability. If the interest is there for them to protect, nothing, and you can quote me anywhere, nothing will stop them from taking steps to protect it.
Wow. Well, now let's narrow it down to Ghana. Now, if you just joined us, we're talking to Desmond Israel. He's a lawyer, he's a data privacy and information security practitioner, and we're talking about interference with democracy using technology. So, and he's explained that there are two aspects to it. There's the cyber aspect, and then there's also the misinformation and disinformation, okay? Now, we've already identified the actors globally, and we're trying to figure out where Ghana falls in all of this. So, you mentioned perhaps the most successful example of Russia interfering in an election, and it was against almighty United States, right, with Hillary Clinton in 2016. Now, you will recall that right after that election, there was a BBC story that uncovered these sort of hacking farms here in Accra, run by the Russians, and they were used to target the American election, which means Russia, Accra, there's already some connection, right?
Yeah.
Then you talked about how they react when they think that you are speaking in a way that is detrimental to them. Well, we do have an incident of our president going to the US and complaining about Russia's interference in neighboring Burkina Faso. Desmond, does this paint a target on our back?
So we're having a conversation about diplomacy.
Well, it's still about, cyber interference,
Yeah.
But
No, I get the connection.
You know their record.
you're
You understand
trying
how they
to-
operate. Yeah.
So let's say that along the line, these statements or commitments by our president, on foreign land about Russia, puts them in a spotlight where till date they hold a disdain about us. We don't know that yet, but let me just give you the scenario. Like, let's create a playbook.
Okay.
Right. So let's say they still hold that disdain to date. Akufo-Addo belongs to the NPP. That means that if they have anything against us, it's either against us as a country. So the motivation would be, let's make a mockery out of their democracy. Let's create confusion, or let's show these president that he dare not messes with us, right? Diplomacy aside, right? So then that means they have two motivations. One is to go after the political party because they had a candidate who was a president who made certain pronouncements. The other is to take the country as a whole and say, oh, you need to eat in between somewhere, you want to mess around with big guys, we'll show you what it is, right? So let's assume that's the scenario. So two motivations suffices. So nothing now stops them. You move from motivation to capability and timing, right? So what do we have? Election is offline. So that would really not mean much for them if they want to do it from cyber. But then we still do have campaign activities that goes on, right? So what do we do? Let's find out how the political party infrastructure is built. Do they have email accounts? Who are their communications people? So I'm building targets for you. Who are their communications people? How did they set up their manifesto committee, for instance? Who is in charge? Who is the secretary? What does he do? Where does he go? What's his knowledge like? What does he love? Is he morally bankrupt? Is he very heavy on social media? They could look at other things like the candidate himself, the one they're leading the show now, flag bearer. Who is he? What has he said? What sort of disdain does the opposition party hold about him? So, for instance, the record would bear me out that consistently opposition would say he's a liar, right? So that now I'm building the playbook to the point where we want to attack. So they would have to find something that justifies what the opposition has been saying. From a cyber perspective, is either from his email systems, his social media accounts, his WhatsApp messages, or anything electronic around him that fits into his communication, right? And I've said that this is a state-to-state kind of engagement, so capability is not limited. And I like for people to see these things because they are real. They are so real. For me, it's not just conjecture. It's not a conversation in passing. These are things that I've studied, live by. So I know when I say that this can happen, it can happen, but like I said, this is just a playbook because we don't have all the factors on the ground.
We're working a scenario.
We work in a scenario, yes. So so that now leads us to the point where how do we shoot the capabilities, right? Troll factories, which is the one you spoke about.
Troll factories.
So we can set up a troll factory like they did with the US and say, let's do, so there's a term called astroturfing in mis and disinformation. That's when I make you believe that you have a strong grassroots base. So we would set up bots and make them represent as though you have a stronger grassroots base, right? And so we would add up to your numbers, say, on social media and be making a lot of noise about you. Right. So you believe in the growth of numbers when in actual fact your numbers dwindling. Then they bring in the kill. So the kill would be where they have one death on him or the candidate, then they'll publish that as fake news, right? Or legit news, but as misinformation. Because the difference between mis and disinformation is just intent. Misinformation, you have no intentions to create that disdain, but the disinformation you intend to.
You did it
deliberately. So that's where fake news propaganda fits better. So once they bring in the kill, they've achieved two things from cyber point of view. They've reduced your belief in the fact that, maybe apart from conventional campaigns, you think that, we have a stronger social media. In the last two weeks, we had like 1 million people joining our social media platforms. Everybody's speaking about our candidate, but you don't You really don't have them.
Wow.
They have given you that false hope through astroturfing, and then they drop the bombshell of what they found on you from whatever electronic medium that they were able to have unauthorized access to. Now, once that gets into the picture, destroys everything, because now there is public outrage against you, plus you have a fan-food expectation of numbers.
Right.
You know, so you may be the best candidate everybody will be rooting to, but a week to elections, you've lost so much. The final day, it affects the outcome. That's election interference.
Wow. So, how does Ghana go about protecting itself from such potential attacks?
I mean, if the Dutch scenario is anything to go by, security by obscurity, I think we've achieved that already by saying that we're going to vote offline.
Okay.
For me, that's 70% problem solved, because really we are, as a country, we have a long way to go in terms of our cyber infrastructure.
Right.
I know people who talk to me about the Global Cybersecurity Index. I eat these things every day, you know. the Global Cybersecurity Index, it scores us more on our external collaboration and our laws. And it's true. We have very strong external collaborations. We have very strong laws. I studied the law. I practiced the law. So I know that we do have laws. And I was shocked when I studied in the US and realized that we were being taught things that are actually new.
Wow.
Yeah, we had laws that were, that solid.
Wow.
And the US were boasting of things that I knew that we had as of 2008. So we do have
ahead of the curve.
we do have very good laws. And then you can see us putting up structures like a cybersecurity authority, trying to organize the ecosystem, the industry and all that. Yeah. So if you look at it from the GCI perspective, you'd say that we're doing tremendously well. I'm not talking about GCI's perspective. I'm talking about infrastructure that protects us against state-to-state warfare. So if that happens to us, election-wise, in terms of D-Day voting itself, we're 70% covered. But we're not covered in terms of the protection and integrity of our candidates. They're part of the democracy. They're part of the democracy. We should take them for who they are, not for what somebody perceived them to be.
Right.
If I don't like candidate A, I should not like him because of local issues that I perceive do not make him the right candidate. Right? Not because all of a sudden I started receiving a feed that the alternative or the other person is actually the one that has to go because of XYZ reasons, which really do not exist. And that's what the world is afraid of. People being able to change public opinion about democracy. And that's why it's managed to find itself under the categories of election interference. So the cyber operations is not only the issues that we want to be bothered about, but of course, to the extent that our elections is offline, we really don't have a big headache there.
You've mentioned that the elections are offline. However, I know that our voters' roll is an electronic, thing. Is there a risk there? Can someone inflate our voters' roll, for example, or mess around with biometric information? Are those possible?
Yeah, there are possibilities. Now, so I thought through these a while back, and you see, we give our voter register to political parties as well. So that's in itself a redundancy that we didn't plan for, which is good. In cybersecurity, redundancy is good.
Good.
So if this data is altered, the other person can say that no. At XYZ date, and this is where forensic comes in, issues about timestamp, when the information was given to you, chain of custody and all that. So you look at it and you say that, this is legit. This is actually the original mirror of the data. Is 32 million people. What you have is 46 million people, so we cannot work with yours. Now, an attacker needs to be able to edit and modify all the redundancy,
every version of it.
Yes, because even if you modify that of the regulators in the EC, the question from the other political parties is, we did not have XYZ millions of voters. What you gave to us is this. So how did you get that? And then it creates tension. Brings me back to an angle of the cyber warfare.
Right.
That can actually be done to create enmity against the electoral system.
Or mistrust.
Mistrust. That's the word I was looking for. Mistrust, distrust towards the electoral system. And that can be a problem. Right. Imagine people getting up one day and hearing that 10 million people more are in the electoral register. You think the EC can explain themselves out of it? Just think about it. The whole media warfare that is going to come along with it. You see, we need to look at all these things. I mean, it's not scaremongering. We need to just look at the possibilities of these things that can happen. But like I said, redundancy would bear us out. You know, I don't think we planned for it, but it actually professionally it comes in to save us.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So just before you leave us, maybe a couple of tips for the typical Ghanaian and his phone.
Oh,
you know, when things come through, how do I know whether I'm looking at, you know, something fake or something real? Or are there telltale signs, little suspicious things that can make me double check before I believe something I've seen online?
Yeah, right. Okay. I've forgotten the name of this app, but I think they were on your radio station this week. No, last week. They were talking about you know, mis and disinformation, you know, some campaign around that. Yeah. I've just forgotten the name, but I actually thought that was a very good approach.
This week, Nathan Gaduga's people, Dubawa.
Exactly, Dubawa. Yeah, that was a very good one. I think that the louder we make the noise about it, the better. You can also use tools from Google. Google has a whole fact-checking platform, which privately you can use even as a media house. Then there are a number of apps online. Don't have everything offered, but there are apps online for fact checking. Yeah. So the best way to fight mis and disinformation is fact checking. Fact checking. Either you are doing it manually or you are doing it, you know, automated with a platform. And then if we take anything from the French direction, I think the political parties should have their own mis disinformation desk or face news team that actually does and check this. Maybe civic education on that, NCC. This is an opportunity. They can team up with, say, Cybersecurity Authority, you know, and do civic education on mis and disinformation, fake news and all that. And then maybe media houses. You have started. I'm here. I'm talking about it. The more people talk about it, the better. All the way to local languages. We should just talk about it, you know. And I think that finally, that united front of protecting our democracy should be the hallmark. It doesn't mean, you know, people should not look out for who is trying to cheat them out of it. But I think that when we want to protect our democracy, it should not be the job of who is in charge. It should be the job of everybody. Exactly.
Yeah, I like that. Listen, just before you, 30 seconds. Assuming we detect an attack from, say, Russia, do we have legal recourse? Is there something we can do to, you know, hold them to account for attempting to interfere with our democracy?
Yeah, there are a lot legal recourse. First of all, if you interfere on the cyber infrastructure of a country, the local laws has jurisdiction to deal because it's crime, and then crime is jurisdictional. Under electronic transactions, we have enough laws for unauthorized access, you know, unauthorized modification. Under the Cybersecurity Act as well, we have, you know, protection against critical information infrastructure. I think the minister gazetted it some time back. Under our criminal code, we also have certain provisions. It took me a minute. Let me see if I can just get you some of the sections. I'm sure people will be interested.
Actually, what we could do is probably put it up on our social media.
Yeah, so if you check section 185, false reports injuring the reputation of the state. And then section 208, publications of false news with intent to cause fear and alarm. These can be put together with section 123 of the Electronic Transactions Act, which deals with general provisions. And then we can also leverage our international partnership. We are under the Budapest Convention. We are under the AU and the ECOWAS. So we can leverage on some of these things, mutual legal assistance, and then we can take international actions based on international actors. Problem is enforcement is not always easy. Yeah.
I feel like I've just completed a university seminar. I've learned a lot.
Thank you.
Desmond, it's been great having you on the show. Thank you so much. Let's do more. Let's talk more about these things.